A birthday dinner to commemorate Jack's 18th birthday was intended to be a straightforward family excursion. However, it turned into something entirely different. I washed the dishes and baked cakes, daydreaming about a day filled with warmth and joy, while my husband, Will, was as engrossed in his work as always. I often pondered when the surface of our life, which had appeared to be running so smoothly, began to crack, much like an old piece of furniture slowly coming apart at the joints. The individuals who resided in the vicinity and were acquainted with us believed that we were a delightful family, residing in a stunning residence with children who were well-behaved, cheerful, and tidy. However, it was solely I who was aware of the malice that had infiltrated that secure and comfortable environment. Will was perpetually preoccupied, disappearing into the tumult of his office life like a phantom, while I became more and more isolated. The intense loneliness and emptiness that I felt that day at the shore were only exacerbated by the scorching heat of the sun. Jack and I entertained ourselves by hurling a ball and exchanging humorous anecdotes. I momentarily glanced away, and I felt the gentle pressure of his hand as he applied sunscreen to my back. At that moment, the action appeared straightforward and merciful. However, it became increasingly intricate as the hours progressed. I came to the realization that Jack was the sole individual who had truly observed me, as my mind was cluttered with memories of shattered aspirations. Will had long denied me the warmth that his casual yet kind words and gestures evoked in me, a sensation that I had not experienced in years. I came to the realization that Jack was attempting to fill the void that my husband had left behind at that exact instant. I was consumed by the potential repercussions for us. However, the family gathering that I had meticulously organized rapidly devolved into a somber event. As we sat on the sand and chuckled, the sound of others having fun receded into the background. I experienced an internal sensation of dissolution, as if a wave had swept away all of my joy. I was compelled to confront an uncomfortable reality as a result of the overwhelming silence. I no longer experienced the same level of enthusiasm that I had previously desired. Exhausted and indifferent, Will returned home. He did not extend a greeting, inquire about my day, or demonstrate any interest in his son. As I sat at the kitchen table, I was acutely aware of his absence. It was no longer refined. It was excessive. I had become a commonplace aspect of his life, which he could effortlessly disregard. As I stood in front of the empty desk, my thoughts veered toward old and tainted recollections. I was incensed with myself for permitting the events to transpire in the manner they had. I was unable to recall the type of woman I used to beta, one who used to be proud of her family. I felt like a mere shadow of my former self, requiring even negative attention to feel significant and recognized. I came to the realization that Jack was the sole individual who could continue to cause my pulse to race as I observed him attentively assimilate each word that evening. I was reminded of the faith and trust one once had by his bright, youthful eyes. However, everything abruptly changed. I was taken aback when he gingerly touched my back. His eyes were filled with a sensitivity that I had never before encountered when they met mine. I was unsure of what to say from a masculine perspective. Suddenly, everything underwent a transformation. The emotions, loneliness, and reluctance to persist with that behavior were revealed. It was as though a silent tempest had struck me, exposing the truths that I had been concealing for an extended period of time. Upon its arrival, I experienced a sense of betrayal toward myself. It was as though my body had turned against me. Upon my return to the shore, I was confronted with the realization that I had constructed my own prison and required the fortitude to flee. I was torn apart by my emotions, which were overwhelming. Even if it was not love, the connection that was forming between us was intolerable. Jack's expression transitioned from amusement to perplexity as I observed him, and I was aware that we were both on the brink of something significant. He was on the brink of uncovering a truth that would no longer be questioned, a truth that would endure indefinitely. How could I develop feelings of affection for an individual who was never my own? Our hope and loneliness were interconnected. However, they were situated on opposite sides of the country. The wall between us appeared to be on the brink of disintegration as I experienced a heightened sense of anxiety and uncertainty. I came to the realization that it was not love with each passing second. It was a perpetual, melancholic sensation of time ebbing away, accompanied by losses that I was unable to let go of. I was torn between love and wrath as I stood on a long, empty beach. Will symbolized the darker aspects of my heritage, while Jack represented my light. However, neither of them was genuinely mine. Therefore, how could I progress? Previously, I perceived summer days as tranquil. However, their radiance seemed to convey an alternative message this time. The sea appeared to be calling us from the window, and the sun was beaming. However, the prospect of Will's perpetual absence caused me to feel melancholy, erasing any enjoyment I may have experienced. His work was consistently prioritized over ours, and each time he did so, it felt as though a weapon had been thrust through my chest. I promptly disregarded the notion and departed with Jack, the sole individual who was still amenable to sharing those fleeting moments with me. I was unable to disregard the fact that Jack was exhibiting signs of maturation as we approached the coast. As he sat in the passenger seat, headphones on, gazing out the window, he appeared to be lost in his own universe. The realization of his knowledge struck me like a deluge. He could be permanently lost if I hesitate. The sensation was both unsettling and surprisingly liberating. As these thoughts persisted, I reflected on the occasions when his diminutive hand was in my possession when I was younger. When he laughed, the room was filled with delight. Upon our arrival, we both experienced a sensation similar to that of exhaling profoundly. Jack assisted me in transporting our luggage to a tranquil location by the water, which alleviated my anxiety. He positioned the umbrella in a manner that evoked recollections of him as a child, while I spread the towels out on the warm sand. While witnessing his transformation, I was eager to engage in conversation with him in order to ascertain the cause. Nevertheless, I refrained from uttering a single syllable. I simply recline on the towel and allow the sun to embrace me like an aged pillow. As I endeavored to alleviate my apprehension, I entertained the notion of applying suntan oil. I observed Jack hesitate when I requested his assistance. He appeared to desire to escape his circumstances. I experienced a sensation of constriction in my chest when he ultimately consented. I was taken aback when he touched me with hands that were no longer those of a child. They were cautious and delicate. I was unaware of the profound effect that this straightforward moment had on me, which caused my body to tremble in a manner that I had never before experienced. Jack applied the oil gradually, moving his palms as if he were contemplating his next course of action. I closed my eyes as he caressed me in a consistent rhythm. I felt an exhilaration that had been lacking for an extended period. I was reminded of the first time I held him as a helpless infant by the sensation of his hands. The sensation that enveloped me at that moment was vastly different from the memory. Nevertheless, his touch became increasingly firm and descended. The abrupt emergence of a storm caught me off guard. I endeavored to express a message that would compel him to cease, but I was unable to do so. I reminded myself that it was merely a kind act, despite my efforts to unwind in the silence. However, it appeared as though the reality in my vicinity was in a perpetual state of flux. He maintained his hands in close proximity to the towel's edge for an extended period, and I could discern that he was uncertain about his next course of action. I had the ability to halt him at any moment. However, I reassured him in a murmur that everything was fine. Those words lingered in the air like an unalterable verdict. During that period, there was a greater degree of silence between us. His touch was the sole thing that remained, and I experienced the sensation of submerging deeper into myself. When his digits began to descend, I was unable to resist. My internal objections dissipated, resulting in an emotional turmoil that I was unable to articulate to myself. It was an experience that was extremely overwhelming, and I experienced a combination of exhilaration and loneliness. I experienced an increase in pleasure, despite my inability to comprehend the circumstances in their entirety. Maybe it was because I had been suppressing that yearning for an extended period of time. As I stood on the beach, My life was devastated and empty. Jack became a rare light that I could no longer ignore. I was unable to contain the torrent of emotions that had been accumulating within me. He was not merely an individual whom I admired. He was the sole source of my vitality in a desolate universe. As we locked eyes, I observed each glimmer in his eyes. His pupils were identical to mine. It was as though fate had presented me with this opportunity, which I was unable to decline. Leaving the past and the future behind, I was able to surrender to the tenderness of the present. I was unsure of what to say, so I muttered, "You are free to continue." The words appeared to speak for themselves, emanating from the intensity of the moment. He proceeded. I encountered more than mere somatic sensations with each deliberate movement of his hands. I closed my eyes and allowed his touch to envelop me in a mystical cloud. It was a world that I was unwilling to depart. He appeared to be addressing the essence of my identity, which is characterized by a sense of authenticity and awe. We were both aware that this was not an ordinary situation. It was a novel method of communication, a resonant expression of emotions that I was unsuccessful in determining the identity. At that precise instant, I comprehended that his hands did more than merely touch me physically. They were currents of an enigmatic emotion that blended exhilaration, lightness, and madness. I could sense a potent desire tearing at me from within. I maintained my lips closed. When my thoughts ceased, the only sound that broke the silence was our shared respiration. The clarity of that desire was revealed. I awoke and gazed upwards at him. In an instant, all other matters appeared trivial. We were isolated from all other activity on that interminable shore, as we were alone. The rules and the world were rendered irrelevant in that moment. Despite the fact that it was a fleeting moment, I perceived an infinite number of potential outcomes. The uncommon emotions that are frequently concealed by the monotony of daily life were present in every second. I yearned to temporarily halt time in order to guarantee that the wall that separated us remained immobile and that our emotions and spirits remained unified. Our concealed refuge was that beachside picnic. Even silence was significant, and we were not required to articulate ourselves through language. My anxieties and concerns vanished for a fleeting moment, and a fragile bond that entrenched us in place took their place. We traversed an infinite expanse of emotions, akin to two ships seeking refuge from a tempest. This demonstrates that emotions can occasionally surpass the constraints of language. As we shared a tranquil and intimate reality, we ceased to be merely mother and son. Instead, we were akin to blossoms that were reaching for the light, oblivious to the possibility that it could become excessively bright at any moment. I was unaware of the rapid passage of time as the sun set, casting lengthy shadows across the shore. I was enveloped in a serene tranquility as I inhaled the fresh sea air. I sensed that something was being repaired, a respite from the monotonous, threadbare existence I had abandoned. Nevertheless, it was time to return home, and with it, a persistent sense of apprehension seeped into my mind, akin to a persistent cold. I had the sensation that everything was predestined for this arrangement as Jack and I entered the vehicle. As we drove a few blocks, I became engrossed in my thoughts, attempting to dissociate myself from the unbearable agony that appeared to be eroding my soul. The fragile framework I had constructed around myself contracted with each revolution of the wheels, as if a perilous surprise was waiting for us upon our return. I was immediately enveloped by the apathy that Will had cultivated through his perpetual absence, as I was reintroduced to my personal universe. I spoke at a high volume while I was at work, as if no one else was present in the house. He appeared to be ensnared in his own personal universe. I could hear his footfall in the kitchen as he prepared dinner. However, it was evident that his attention was elsewhere. Each time he turned his gaze away from me, it became more challenging to suppress the wrath that was accumulating within me. Just to maintain a sense of normalcy, I inquired, "Will, are you hungry again?" He emitted a phony and transient smile. He continued to peruse the cupboards in search of an activity for the evening, scarcely causing his head to nod. As I lay in bed that evening, I was consumed by thoughts of Jack. His eyes, hands, and undivided attention all contributed to the blurring of the boundaries of what was previously regarded as normal. I made an effort to dismiss those thoughts. However, they persisted. Although I was aware that I should cease and compulsively remain mute, a malevolent aspect of me resisted. I was deprived of the connection and compassion that I had previously experienced from Will. Jack's voice became more and more subdued as the days passed. His nonverbal communication was more effective than any words he could have spoken. As I prepared dinner or relaxed in the living room, his gaze was fixated on me. While we were viewing television one evening, I was unable to divert his attention. The silent bond between us was the consequence of my inability to deny it. Rather, I permitted it to develop. An experience that was profoundly felt, yet neither of us could articulate it. It was exceedingly sweltering in the residence over the weekend. I was alone with Jack as we embarked on our journey once more. I am uncertain as to the source of the intense yearning to revisit the beach, our beach, but it was present. It is possible that I was attempting to escape the stuffy home, or that I was anticipating that the fresh air would assist in clearing my mind. It was evident that we were restless during the car journey. Jack sat with his headphones on, gazing out the window. I was compelled to confront the circumstance between us as a result of an internal tension. It was a tranquil and relaxing morning. As I prepared breakfast in the kitchen, the aromas of freshly brewed coffee and toasty toast interacted. I could not help but smile as I recalled the numerous occasions on which Will would quickly gaze at me before rushing out the door. The consistent cadence of our lives was evident in the manner in which our mornings followed a predictable pattern. Nevertheless, he approached me today and caressed me on the forehead. His presence was palpable for a fleeting moment, reminiscent of the gentle warmth of the early spring sun. Nevertheless, he shortly dispersed, resuming his routine, work-oriented existence. As I heard his footsteps on the stairs and the door shut, I was left alone in the sunny, quiet house. Jack entered the kitchen silently, as was his custom, as if he were a phantom in the dim morning light. It was captivating to witness his composure as he stood by the window, gazing out. His eyes were fixed on me, as if they were at the beach, and he appeared to be preoccupied with nothing else. It was apparent to both of us that this relationship had progressed beyond a straightforward mother-son bond. I could sense his breath emanating behind me, and the temperature was surging. It functioned as a gentle reminder of the capacity of love and warmth to incorporate all that is present. I was astounded by the intensity of the moment and endeavored to seize it by offering a kind comment. Nevertheless, he advanced before I could complete my sentence, and I was overwhelmed by a combination of apprehension and emotion. "It is imperative that I depart." I initiated the procedure. Nevertheless, he intervened. I felt a range of emotions when his lips touched mine. From the instant I returned his kiss, everything unraveled. I was aware that it was incorrect. I was so engrossed in my feelings of apprehension and love that I neglected to evaluate the morality of my actions. I was aware that it had the capacity to completely destroy everything. After each kiss, I felt a sense of vitality that I had not felt in a long time. I defied all the rules and entered the unknown for those fleeting moments. Despite the fact that the days seemed to linger indefinitely, I was overcome by a sense of tempest. Jack and I crossed a boundary that was never intended to be crossed. I now comprehended that this was not a mistake that would be promptly rectified, but rather a substantial burden that would accrue over time. I recognized that I was on the brink of my own existence and was unable to avoid the humiliation that weighed me down. I was unable to disregard his behavior or his subtle expressions of affection, which elicited feelings of desire and yearning. Nevertheless, I continued to experience the sensation that we were perilously close to descending into an abyss. I came to the realization that my character had undergone a significant transformation at that precise moment. We were involved in an activity that was of great importance, despite the fact that it violated the norms. The barriers that had prevented me from expressing the emotions I had been suppressing were dismantled by the sensation of his hands caressing me. I contemplated whether I had made an error, as